Baby found a bear cub, abandoned in a pet store window. What he did next changed everything. The evening air carried that particular chill that only came in late autumn, when the leaves had already turned golden and fallen to create carpets of rust and amber on the sidewalks. Ethan Marshall walked slowly, his hand wrapped around his 4-year-old son, Logan's, tiny fingers, feeling the warmth of that small palm against his own. They had taken this walk every evening for the past 3 months, ever since Ethan's wife had passed away, and it had become their ritual, their way of finding peace in a world that had suddenly become too quiet, too empty. The streetlights were just beginning to flicker on, casting pools of yellow light that made the shadows between them seem darker, deeper. Logan kicked at the leaves as they walked, his little sneakers making satisfying crunching sounds that echoed off the closed storefronts they passed. Most of the shops on Maple Street had been closed for years now, their windows covered with brown paper or wooden boards, victims of the big shopping mall that had opened on the other side of town. But Ethan liked walking here because it was quiet, because nobody bothered them, because he could let Logan explore without worrying about traffic or crowds. That evening, something was different. Logan suddenly stopped walking, his hand tugging at Ethan's as he pointed toward one of the shops they had passed dozens of times before. The old pet store, Murphy's Menagerie, had been closed for at least 2 years, its windows always dark, always empty. But tonight there was a soft glow coming from inside, barely visible through the grimy glass. Ethan felt his heart skip slightly, not from fear, but from surprise. He had been so certain the place was abandoned. Logan pulled harder, his eyes wide with the kind of wonder only children could manage, and Ethan found himself walking toward the store, drawn by his son's curiosity and perhaps a little of his own. The closer they got, the stranger it became. The light wasn't coming from overhead fixtures or lamps. It seemed to be emanating from something in the window display itself. A gentle, pulsing glow that reminded Ethan of moonlight on water. When they reached the window, both father and son stood perfectly still, their reflections ghost-like in the glass as they stared at what was inside. There, sitting on a faded blue cushion that had seen better days, was a bear cub. At least, that's what it looked like at first glance. But the longer Ethan stared, the more he realized something was profoundly wrong, or perhaps profoundly right about this creature. Its fur wasn't the brown or black you'd expect from a bear. Instead, it seemed to shift colors in the dim light, sometimes appearing silver, sometimes a deep midnight blue, sometimes catching the light in a way that made it look like it was covered in tiny stars. The cub was small, no bigger than a medium-sized dog, and it sat with an unusual stillness, its eyes closed, its breathing so shallow that Ethan had to look carefully to see its chest moving at all. Logan pressed his face against the glass, his breath fogging it up, and whispered something Ethan couldn't quite hear. The moment the child's breath touched the window, the cub's eyes opened. They weren't the eyes of any animal Ethan had ever seen. They were deep, impossibly deep, like looking into a well that went down forever. They weren't just black, they contained depths, layers, as if entire galaxies swirled within them. The cub looked directly at Logan, and Ethan felt his son's hand tighten in his. But it wasn't fear he sensed in his child. It was recognition, as if Logan and this strange creature had known each other long before this moment. The cub tilted its head slightly, and Logan mimicked the gesture perfectly. The two of them engaged in some silent conversation that Ethan couldn't begin to understand. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time seemed to stretch and compress around them, the street sounds fading away until all Ethan could hear was his own heartbeat and Logan's quiet breathing. The cub never moved from its cushion, never made a sound, but something was happening between it and his son, some kind of connection that defied explanation. Ethan tried the door handle, expecting it to be locked, but it turned easily in his hand. The door swung open with a soft creak that sounded too loud in the silence. Inside, the store smelled of dust and old wood, with an underlying scent of something sweet and unfamiliar, like flowers that didn't exist in this world. The shelves were empty, covered in cobwebs that caught the strange light emanating from the cub. Logan walked forward without hesitation, moving toward the window display as if pulled by an invisible thread. Ethan followed, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor, each sound seeming to bounce around the empty space forever. When Logan reached the cub, he sat down cross-legged in front of it, and the creature opened its eyes fully for the first time. In that moment, Ethan saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. The cub wasn't just looking at Logan, it was seeing him, understanding him in a way that seemed impossible for an animal. Logan reached out slowly, his small hand moving through the air with the careful precision of someone approaching something sacred. The cub didn't move, didn't even blink, just watched with those impossible eyes as the boy's fingers came closer and closer. When Logan's hand finally touched the creature's fur, Ethan expected something dramatic to happen. Instead, there was only silence, only stillness, only the sight of his son gently stroking the strange animal's head with a tenderness that broke Ethan's heart. The fur felt different under Logan's touch. Ethan could tell from the way his son's eyes widened slightly. Logan turned to look at his father, and for the first time in 3 months, Ethan saw his son smile. Not the forced, trying to be brave smile he'd been wearing since the funeral, but a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes and lit up his whole face. "He's lonely, Daddy," Logan said, his voice soft but certain. "Just like us." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He knelt down beside his son, really looking at the cub for the first time. It was thin, too thin, its ribs visible beneath that strange, color-shifting fur. There was no food bowl, no water dish, nothing to suggest anyone had been caring for it. How long had it been here, sitting in this window? Waiting? And waiting for what? Ethan reached out tentatively, his adult skepticism warring with the evidence of his own eyes. When his fingers touched the cub's fur, he understood immediately what had surprised Logan. It didn't feel like fur at all. It was soft, yes, but it was also warm in a way that had nothing to do with body heat. It was like touching sunlight, like putting your hand in a beam of light and feeling it as a physical thing. The cub turned its gaze to Ethan, and he found himself unable to look away from those depths. In them, he saw things he couldn't name, couldn't understand, but somehow recognized. He saw vast distances and infinite spaces. He saw loneliness that stretched across impossible spans of time. He saw hope, fragile and persistent, burning like a tiny flame in an endless darkness. "We can't just take it," Ethan heard himself saying, even as part of him wondered why not. The store was clearly abandoned. The cub was clearly in need of care. And Logan needed this. Ethan could see it in every line of his son's body, in the way he leaned into the creature as if drawing comfort from its strange presence. There must be an owner, someone who... But even as he spoke, he knew he was wrong. This cub didn't belong to anyone, not in the way a pet belongs to an owner. If anything, it felt like the cub had been waiting here specifically for them, for this moment, for Logan's small hand on its unusual fur. The rational part of Ethan's mind, the part that had kept him functioning through the grief and the single parenthood and the endless days that all blurred together, told him this was insane. You don't just find mysterious glowing bear cubs in abandoned pet stores. You don't take home animals that have fur like starlight and eyes like black holes. You certainly don't make major decisions based on your 4-year-old son's conviction that a strange creature is lonely like us. But the rational part of his mind had been notably unhelpful lately. It hadn't helped him explain to Logan why Mommy wasn't coming home. It hadn't helped him figure out how to fill the silence in their house that used to be filled with her laughter. It hadn't helped him understand why some mornings he woke up, and for just a second, just one blessed second, he forgot she was gone. So maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop listening to the rational part of his mind. Logan had already made the decision anyway. He had gathered the cub into his arms, and the creature had gone willingly, curling against the boy's chest as if it had always belonged there. It weighed almost nothing, Ethan noticed when Logan stood up. How was that possible? Even a small cub should have some substantial weight to it. But Logan held it as easily as he would hold a stuffed animal. "Please, Daddy," Logan said, and those 2 words contained everything. "Please let me have this one strange, wonderful thing. Please let us take care of something that needs us. Please let us not be alone anymore." Ethan looked around the empty store one more time, searching for any sign that someone might object, that someone might care. But there was nothing. Just dust and shadows, and the lingering sense that this place had been waiting for them as much as the cub had. He noticed something else then, something he had missed in his focus on the creature. Next to the cushion where the cub had been sitting was a small object, partially hidden under a fold of fabric. Ethan picked it up carefully. It was a stone, about the size of his palm, smooth and dark with veins of silver running through it like frozen lightning. It was warm to the touch, with the same not quite normal warmth as the cub's fur. There was something attached to it, a small piece of paper so old it was yellow and brittle. Ethan unfolded it carefully, afraid it might crumble in his hands. The writing was faded but still legible, though the words made no sense to him. "When the star fallen finds the heart broken, the circle begins again." Logan was already heading toward the door, the cub held securely in his arms, and Ethan found himself following. As they stepped out onto the sidewalk, he turned back to look at the store one more time. The light in the window was gone now, and the place looked exactly as it had every other night they'd passed it. Dark, empty, abandoned. As if what had just happened was a dream. But the weight of the stone in his pocket and the sight of Logan walking ahead with the cub told him otherwise. They walked home in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the one they'd been living with. This wasn't the heavy, oppressive quiet of grief. This was the expectant hush of something about to begin, the pause before the first note of a song, the moment before a story starts. Logan hummed softly as he walked, a tuneless little melody that seemed to make the cub's fur shimmer more brightly. People they passed on the street didn't seem to notice anything unusual. Just a father and son walking home, the boy carrying what looked like a stuffed animal. How was that possible? How could they not see what Ethan saw? Their house sat at the end of Willow Lane, a small 2-story colonial that had seemed too big since Sarah had died. Every room held memories. Every corner reminded him of something she'd said or done. But tonight, as they walked up the front path, the house looked different somehow. Warmer, more welcoming, as if it had been waiting for them to bring something home. Logan carried the cub straight to the living room, settling on the carpet in front of the fireplace that they hadn't lit since last winter. The cub uncurled from Logan's arms and sat facing the cold fireplace, its head tilted as if listening to something only it could hear. Ethan watched from the doorway, still trying to process what they'd done, what they'd brought into their home. The rational part of his mind made one last attempt at control, suggesting he should call animal control or the police or someone who would know what to do with a possibly exotic animal. But then Logan looked up at him with those bright, hopeful eyes, and Ethan knew he wouldn't make any calls. "What should we feed it?" Ethan asked, moving into the room and sitting on the couch. It was a practical question, a normal question, the kind of thing you'd ask about any new pet. Logan considered this seriously, his forehead wrinkling in concentration. The cub turned to look at them both, and Ethan could have sworn he saw amusement in those deep, impossible eyes. "I don't think he eats food," Logan said finally, with the matter-of-fact certainty that children sometimes displayed about things they couldn't possibly know. "Not our kind of food." Ethan wanted to argue, to point out that all animals need to eat, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way the cub hadn't looked thin in a starved way, but thin in an ethereal way. As if physical substance wasn't quite its natural state. Maybe it was the memory of that strange warmth, that not quite real quality to its fur. Or maybe he was just too tired to argue with a 4-year-old about the dietary needs of an impossible creature. He pulled the stone from his pocket, setting it on the coffee table. The moment it left his hand, the cub's attention snapped to it with an intensity that was almost frightening. It moved for the first time since they'd arrived home, padding over to the table with movements that were too fluid, too graceful for a normal animal. It touched its nose to the stone, and both the stone and the cub began to glow more brightly. Logan clapped his hands in delight, and Ethan felt his heart racing. What had they brought into their home? What was this creature? But his fear was tempered by the look of pure joy on Logan's face, a look he hadn't seen in so long he'd almost forgotten what it looked like. The cub curled up next to the stone, its glow diminishing to a soft pulse that matched the rhythm of breathing. Logan scooted over to sit beside it, his hand resting on its back, and within minutes both boy and cub were asleep. Ethan sat there in the growing darkness, watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time in months, watching the strange creature that had somehow become theirs, watching the stone pulse with its own inner light. He thought about the note, about circles beginning again, about star-fallen things and broken hearts. He thought about Sarah, about how she would have reacted to this situation. She would have been delighted, he realized. She would have accepted the magic of it without question, would have made up stories about where the cub came from and where it was going. She would have known somehow that this was meant to be. The house settled around them with familiar creaks and sighs, but tonight those sounds seemed different, seemed to be welcoming the new presence among them. Ethan found himself relaxing, the constant tension he'd been carrying for months slowly easing. Whatever this creature was, wherever it had come from, it belonged here now. With them. With Logan. As the night deepened, Ethan noticed something else. The cub's breathing had synchronized with Logan's, the two of them inhaling and exhaling in perfect unison. And stranger still, Ethan found his own breathing falling into the same rhythm. As if the three of them were connected by invisible threads, bound together by something deeper than circumstance. He should have been frightened. He should have been looking up exotic animal laws on his phone, or researching what to do if you find an abandoned cub. Instead, he found himself thinking about the people who might be watching this story unfold. People in their own homes dealing with their own losses and loneliness. He wondered if they would understand the choice he'd made, the leap of faith he'd taken. He hoped they would. He hoped they knew that sometimes the most important decisions we make aren't the logical ones, but the ones that feel right in our hearts. The stone on the coffee table pulsed more brightly for a moment, and in that flash of light, Ethan could have sworn he saw something reflected in its surface. Not the room around them, but somewhere else, somewhere far away. A place where the sky was a different color, where the stars arranged themselves in patterns he didn't recognize. But before he could look closer, the light faded back to its gentle pulse, and the vision, if that's what it had been, was gone. Logan stirred in his sleep, murmuring something that sounded like home, and the cub made a soft sound in response. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr, but something in between, something comforting, something that said, yes, this is home now. Ethan must have dozed off at some point because he woke to find the living room bathed in pale morning light. Logan was still asleep, but the cub was awake, sitting up and watching Ethan with those fathomless eyes. In the daylight, its fur looked different again, more silver than blue, with hints of gold where the sun touched it. It looked more solid, too, more real, as if the night had somehow anchored it more firmly to this world. The stone still sat on the coffee table, but it looked ordinary now, just a pretty rock with some interesting veining. Ethan might have convinced himself he'd imagined the glowing, the pulsing, the vision of another world, except for the way the cub kept glancing at it, as if checking to make sure it was still there. Logan woke slowly, stretching like a cat before his eyes popped open and immediately sought out the cub. The smile that spread across his face when he saw it was still there, still real, made Ethan's chest tight with emotion. "He stayed," Logan whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make the creature disappear. The cub responded by nuzzling against Logan's cheek, a gesture so tender and familiar that it brought tears to Ethan's eyes. How long had it been since he'd seen his son this happy? How long since the house had felt this alive? "We need to call him something," Logan announced, his practical side asserting itself. "We can't just keep calling him the cub." Ethan nodded, though privately, he wondered if human names could even apply to something like this. But Logan was already thinking, his face scrunched up in concentration. "Shimmer," Logan said finally, because of how his fur shimmers. It was perfect, Ethan thought. Simple, descriptive, but also hints at the creature's otherworldly nature. Shimmer seemed to approve too, making that soft not purr sound again. And so they settled into a routine that should have been impossible, but somehow felt entirely natural. Shimmer didn't eat food, as Logan had predicted, but seemed to draw energy from the stone. Every few hours he would pad over to wherever they'd placed it and touch his nose to its surface. Each time, both stone and cub would glow briefly, and Shimmer would seem refreshed, more solid, more present. Logan carried the stone with him from room to room, making sure Shimmer was never far from it. The boy had an instinctive understanding of what the creature needed that Ethan couldn't explain. Days passed, and Ethan found himself forgetting to question the strangeness of their situation. Shimmer became part of their routine, part of their family. He would sit with Logan during breakfast, his presence somehow making the empty chair where Sarah used to sit less noticeable. He would curl up on Logan's bed during story time, his soft glow making nightlight unnecessary. He would pad silently through the house during the day, always staying close to Logan, always watching with those deep, knowing eyes. The neighbors, when they saw Shimmer, seemed to see only what they expected to see. Mrs. Henderson from next door commented on what a beautiful dog they'd gotten. Mr. Park from across the street asked what breed of cat it was. Everyone saw something different, something that fit their understanding of the world, and Ethan stopped trying to correct them. But there were moments, quiet moments when Logan was at preschool and Ethan was working from home, when he would look at Shimmer and feel the full weight of the mystery. What was this creature? Where had it come from? And perhaps most importantly, why had it been waiting in that abandoned pet store? The note provided no real answers, Only more questions. Starfallen, heartbroken, circles beginning again. The words felt important, felt heavy with meaning he couldn't quite grasp. Sometimes he would find Shimmer sitting by the window, staring up at the sky with an expression that could only be described as longing. In those moments, the creature looked less like an unusual pet and more like what it truly was, something from somewhere else, something that perhaps didn't belong here at all. One evening, about 2 weeks after they'd found Shimmer, something changed. Logan had gone to bed early, tired from a day at the park, and Ethan was sitting in the living room, supposedly working on his laptop, but really just watching Shimmer. The creature was restless, pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace, occasionally pausing to look at the stone, then at the window, then back at the stone. Ethan had never seen him agitated before, and it made him nervous. "What is it, boy?" he asked, though he felt silly talking to the creature as if it were a normal pet. Shimmer turned those impossible eyes on him, and for a moment, Ethan could have sworn he saw actual communication there, actual intent to convey something important. Then, Shimmer did something he'd never done before. He picked up the stone in his mouth, carefully, gently, and carried it to the front door. Ethan followed, his heart beating faster though he couldn't say why. Shimmer set the stone down and looked at the door, then at Ethan, then back at the door. The message was clear. He wanted to go out, but this felt different from a dog needing a walk. This felt important, urgent even. Ethan opened the door, and Shimmer picked up the stone again and padded out into the night. Ethan grabbed his jacket and followed, not wanting to wake Logan, but also not willing to let Shimmer go alone. The creature led him through the quiet streets, moving with purpose, clearly heading somewhere specific. They passed the abandoned pet store, and Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air, but Shimmer kept going, leading him toward the old part of town, where the historic buildings stood like sentinels from another era. They stopped in front of the town library, a beautiful old building with columns and carved stone details that had been there since the town's founding in the 1800s. It was closed, of course, but Shimmer sat down in front of the main entrance and set the stone on the ground. Then he looked up at the sky and made a sound Ethan had never heard before, a low, musical note that seemed to resonate in the air long after Shimmer had stopped making it. The stone began to glow, brighter than Ethan had ever seen it, and he had to shield his eyes. When the light faded, there was someone standing there. Not something, someone. A woman, though that word didn't quite capture what Ethan was seeing. She was tall, taller than any person he'd ever met, with skin that had the same quality as Shimmer's fur, seeming to shift and change in the moonlight. Her clothes, if they were clothes, looked like they were made of night sky, dark fabric shot through with points of light that might have been stars. She knelt down, and Shimmer ran to her, making sounds of joy that were almost like laughter. She gathered him into her arms, and for a moment, both of them glowed with the same soft light. Then she looked at Ethan, and he saw that her eyes were like Shimmer's, deep and fathomless and full of stars. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was like music, like wind chimes, like nothing he'd ever heard before. "Thank you for caring for him. Thank you for giving him shelter when he was lost." Ethan found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "What? Who are you?" She smiled, and it was sad and beautiful at the same time. "I am his mother. We are travelers, you might say. We journey between worlds, between stars. But sometimes the young ones get separated. Sometimes they fall." "Starfallen," Ethan breathed, remembering the note. She nodded. "He fell through a crack between worlds, landed here, in your reality. I've been searching for him for what you would call months. The stone is a beacon, but it only works when someone with a pure heart, a broken heart that's learning to heal, activates it with their touch. She looked at him with those impossible eyes, and Ethan felt like she was seeing all of him, all his grief and love and confusion. Your son's love, your willingness to believe. Your broken heart's learning to mend, these things called me here, made it possible for me to find him. Ethan thought of Logan, asleep at home, and his heart clenched. He loves Shimmer. It will break his heart if... The woman stood, still holding Shimmer, and Ethan could see the conflict in her alien features. I know, and that is why I will make you an offer, something that is not usually done. Shimmer is young, very young by our standards. He could stay with you for a while longer. Grow under your care, learn about your world. It would be educational for him and healing for you and your son. She paused, considering. 7 of your years. That's how long he could stay before he needs to return to his own kind, to learn what he needs to know to be what he is meant to be. 7 years of companionship, of wonder, of healing, and then a gentle goodbye with understanding instead of loss. 7 years. Logan would be 11. Old enough to understand, perhaps. That some things are meant to be temporary. That sometimes love means letting go. And 7 years of Shimmer's presence, of his strange comfort, of the magic he brought into their lives. It was more than Ethan had dared hope for when he thought they were about to lose him. Yes, he said without hesitation. Yes, please, 7 years. The woman smiled again, that sad, beautiful smile, and set Shimmer down. The cub immediately ran to Ethan, climbing up to rest against his chest, and Ethan was surprised to find he was crying. Take care of him, she said. Teach him about love and loss and the beauty of temporary things. These are lessons we sometimes forget, traveling between the stars. And let him teach your son that the universe is vast and strange and wonderful, that there is always magic to be found if you know how to look. She began to fade, becoming translucent like morning mist. The stone will still work, should you ever need to call for help. And when the 7 years are done, it will glow one last time, and I will come for him. It will not be a sad parting, I promise you that. It will be a celebration of time well spent, of love shared, of hearts healed. And then she was gone, as if she had never been there at all. Ethan stood in front of the library for a long moment, holding Shimmer, feeling the weight of what had just happened, what had been promised, what would eventually come. Then he walked home through the quiet streets. The cub warm against his chest, the stone safe in his pocket. Logan was still asleep when they got home, and Ethan tucked Shimmer in beside him. The boy's arm came around the cub automatically, pulling him close, and both of them sighed contentedly. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching them, thinking about the 7 years ahead. 7 years of magic, 7 years of healing, 7 years to prepare for a goodbye that wouldn't be about loss but about gratitude for time given. He thought about the people who might hear this story, about their own losses and found families, their own moments of unexpected magic. He hoped they understood that sometimes the most precious things are the ones we can't keep forever, that sometimes the greatest gift is knowing how long we have and making every moment count. He thought about sharing this story with others, about letting them know that magic exists in the world, even if it comes in forms we don't expect. Even if it comes with expiration dates, even if it asks us to believe in impossible things. The stone pulsed gently in his pocket, a reminder of the promise made, the time given, the magic that had entered their lives through an abandoned pet store window. Ethan smiled, thinking of Sarah, knowing she would have loved this, would have embraced every strange, wonderful moment of it. He had 7 years to help Logan grow, to help him understand that love isn't diminished by its temporary nature, that some of the most beautiful things in life are the ones that don't last forever. 7 years to heal, to hope, to believe in impossible things. It was more than enough. It was everything. As he finally went to his own bed, Ethan thought about the title Logan had given their strange new family member, Shimmer. It was perfect, really, because that's what this whole experience was. A shimmer of something otherworldly in their ordinary lives, a glimpse of magic in the mundane, a temporary blessing that would leave them forever changed. Tomorrow, he would make pancakes for breakfast, and Shimmer would sit at the table with them, and Logan would laugh at something silly, and life would go on. But it would be a life touched by wonder, a life that knew for certain that there was more to the universe than what we could see and understand. A life that had been broken and was slowly, beautifully, mysteriously being put back together, one magical day at a time. The next morning brought new wonders. Ethan woke to find Logan and Shimmer in the backyard, and what he saw made him stop in the doorway, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. Shimmer was teaching Logan something, or perhaps it was the other way around. They were sitting facing each other, and between them, tiny motes of light danced in the air like fireflies, except it was broad daylight, and these lights were silver and gold and blue. Logan was giggling, reaching out to touch the lights, and they swirled around his fingers like living things. Shimmer's eyes were bright with what could only be described as joy, and his fur was shimmering more intensely than ever before. When Logan noticed his father watching, he called out excitedly, "Daddy, look! Shimmer's teaching me to see the light bugs. They're everywhere, but you have to look just right." Ethan walked over slowly, afraid to disturb whatever was happening. As he got closer, he began to see them too, the tiny lights that danced in the air. They weren't really bugs, he realized. They were something else, something that existed in the spaces between what was real and what was possible. Logan reached out and took his father's hand, and suddenly Ethan could see them clearly. They were everywhere, these points of light, dancing in the air, swirling around the trees, playing in the grass. The world was full of them, had always been full of them, but he'd never known how to look. Shimmer says they're like the universe breathing, Logan explained, his 4-year-old vocabulary struggling with concepts too big for words. They're always here, but most people can't see them because they forget how to look with their hearts instead of just their eyes. It should have sounded like childish nonsense, but standing there in his backyard, watching the lights dance, feeling Shimmer's warm presence beside them, Ethan understood exactly what his son meant. These 7 years weren't just about healing from loss. They were about learning to see the world through new eyes, about discovering the magic that had always been there, waiting for someone to notice it. He thought about the people who would share in this story, people who might be struggling with their own losses, their own moments of darkness. He wanted them to know that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, that sometimes a chance encounter can change everything, that sometimes the universe sends exactly what we need, even if it's not what we expected. Days turned into weeks, and their life with Shimmer developed its own rhythm. The creature didn't just live with them, he became part of the fabric of their existence. He would wake Logan each morning with gentle nuzzles, his fur warm and soft against the boy's cheek. He would sit with Ethan during his work-from-home days, a comforting presence that somehow made the empty house feel less empty. He would curl up between them during movie nights, his soft glow making everything feel cozy and safe. But more than that, Shimmer brought wonder back into their lives. He showed them things they'd never noticed before. the way shadows could dance when no one was moving, the way certain flowers sang tiny songs only he could hear, the way the rain sometimes fell upward for just a moment before remembering which way was down. Logan started drawing pictures of their adventures with shimmer, crude crayon renderings that somehow captured the magic better than any photograph could. There was one of Shimmer showing them the light bugs, another of the time they'd gone to the park, and Shimmer had made friends with a butterfly that landed on his nose and stayed there for an hour, its wings shimmering with the same strange light as his fur. There was a picture of the three of them sitting on the couch, reading a book, with Shimmer's glow illuminating the pages. Ethan kept every drawing, storing them carefully in a box that he knew would become precious beyond measure when the 7 years were up. They were evidence, proof that this magical time had really happened, that it wasn't just a dream they'd shared. One evening, about a month after the encounter at the library, they had a visitor. Ethan answered the doorbell to find a woman standing on their porch, but not the otherworldly being from before. This was a perfectly ordinary-looking woman in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I'm Jessica Brooks. I used to run the Historical Society before I retired. I heard, well, this will sound strange, but I heard you might have found something unusual at Murphy's old pet store." Ethan's first instinct was to deny everything, to protect their secret, but something in the woman's eyes made him pause. There was a knowing there, a recognition. "Why don't you come in?" he said finally. Jessica entered their home and immediately spotted Shimmer, who was lying on his favorite spot on the living room rug. Her intake of breath was audible. "Oh my," she whispered. "It's true then, another starfall." She sat down slowly, never taking her eyes off Shimmer, who regarded her with curious interest. "My grandmother told me stories," she said softly, "about the star-fallen ones. She said they came every few generations, always to families that needed them, always at just the right time. She said she'd seen one herself when she was a little girl, right after her father died in the war. A creature of light and shadow that stayed with them for exactly 7 years, helping them heal, showing them wonders, teaching them that the universe was bigger and stranger and more beautiful than anyone imagined." She reached into her bag and pulled out an old photo album, its leather cover cracked with age. She opened it carefully, turning pages until she found what she was looking for. It was an old photograph, sepia-toned and slightly blurry, but clear enough. It showed a young girl, maybe 8 or 9, sitting in a garden. And beside her, barely visible but definitely there, was a creature that looked remarkably like Shimmer. Not exactly the same. Each starfallen was unique, Jessica explained, but similar enough that there was no mistaking what it was. "My grandmother," Jessica said, touching the photo gently. This was taken in 1923, the last year before her star-fallen friend had to leave. She said saying goodbye was the hardest and most beautiful thing she ever did. Hard because she loved him so much. Beautiful because she understood that their time together was a gift, complete and perfect in its temporary nature. Logan had been listening from the stairs, and now he came into the room, Shimmer immediately moving to his side. "Will Shimmer have to leave?" he asked, his voice small. Jessica looked at him with those kind eyes and nodded slowly. "Someday, yes, but not for a long time, and when he does, you'll understand why and you'll be ready." She turned to Ethan. "The Starfallen come to teach us about love that transcends loss, about finding magic in the mundane, about the beauty of temporary things. Your son is very lucky. Not everyone gets to experience this kind of wonder." She stood to leave, but paused at the door. If you ever want to talk, or if you want to see more of my grandmother's photos and journals, you're always welcome. It helps sometimes knowing you're not alone in experiencing something extraordinary." After she left, Ethan found himself thinking about all the families throughout history who might have had their own shimmers, their own 7-year miracles. It made the world seem both bigger and smaller at the same time. Bigger because it suggested a universe full of wonders they'd never imagined. Smaller because it meant they were part of a community of people who had experienced this same magic, who understood what it meant to be chosen for this temporary blessing. That night, as he tucked Logan into bed with Shimmer curled beside him, his son asked, "Daddy, do you think Mommy sent Shimmer to us?" Ethan's throat tightened. He'd been wondering the same thing himself. "I don't know, buddy. Maybe. Or maybe the universe just knew we needed him." Logan considered this, then nodded. "I think Mommy would have loved him," he said softly. "I think she would have seen the light bugs right away." Yes, Ethan thought, she would have. Sarah had always been the one to notice magic in ordinary things, to find wonder in unexpected places. In a way, Shimmer was carrying on her legacy, teaching them to see the world the way she had. The thought was both heartbreaking and comforting. As autumn turned to winter, Shimmer showed them new wonders. On the first snowy day, he led them outside and showed them how each snowflake carried its own tiny spark of light, invisible to normal sight but clear as day when you looked with what Logan had started calling heart eyes. They built a snowman together, and Shimmer touched it with his nose, and for just a moment the snowman seemed to glow from within, seemed almost alive. Logan laughed with pure delight, and Ethan found himself laughing too, really laughing, for the first time since Sarah's death. Christmas approached, their first without Sarah, and Ethan had been dreading it. But Shimmer seemed to sense the approaching sadness and worked his own kind of magic. He would curl up near their small Christmas tree each evening, and his glow would make the ornaments sparkle in ways that had nothing to do with the string lights. On Christmas Eve, Ethan woke in the middle of the night to find Shimmer and Logan sitting by the window, looking up at the stars. He joined them quietly, and Logan whispered, "Shimmer's showing me his home. See that star there, the really bright one? That's where he comes from. He says it's not really a star, it's a door, and behind it are all the places where the star-fallen live when they're not here." Ethan looked where Logan was pointing and saw a star that did seem unusually bright, pulsing with a light that reminded him of Shimmer's glow. Whether it was really Shimmer's home or just a star that Logan had decided was special didn't matter. What mattered was the wonder in his son's voice, the magic of the moment, the three of them together on Christmas Eve, finding joy despite the absence that still ached in their hearts. "Tell me more about it," Ethan said, settling in beside them. And Logan did, weaving a story about the star-fallen world that might have been Shimmer's truth, or might have been a 4-year-old's imagination, or might have been both. It didn't matter. They were together. They were healing. And they had been given the gift of time. The winter passed in a blur of small miracles. Shimmer taught them to hear the songs in icicles, each one ringing with its own crystalline note when the wind touched it just right. He showed them how to find warm spots in the coldest days, little pockets of summer that existed outside of time. He led them on walks through the snowy woods where they discovered trees that hummed with ancient memories, and streams that giggled like children even under their coating of ice. Logan grew during those months, not just physically but in other ways too. He became more confident, more curious, more open to the wonders around him. He started making friends at preschool by showing them tiny bits of the magic Shimmer had taught him. Nothing too obvious. Just Little things like finding four-leaf clovers everywhere he looked, or always knowing when it was about to rain, because the air tasted purple, as he put it. Spring arrived with a burst of color and life, and Shimmer seemed to come even more alive with it. His fur took on new hues, greens and golds, mixing with the silver and blue. He would disappear into the garden for hours, and when Logan followed him, they would find him nose-deep in flowers, seeming to communicate with them in some wordless way. The garden that year grew like never before. Vegetables the size of melons, flowers that bloomed in impossible colors, tomatoes that tasted like sunshine. The neighbors marveled at their green thumb, and Ethan just smiled and credited beginner's luck. But he knew it was Shimmer's influence, the creature's very presence making everything around him more alive, more vibrant, more itself. One day in late spring they received another visitor. This time it was a young man, maybe 25, with serious eyes and a notebook clutched in his hand. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, "but Jessica Brooks suggested I come see you. I'm writing a book about local folklore, and she mentioned you might have some interesting experiences to share." Ethan was about to politely decline when the young man added, "It's about the Star Fallen. I know they're real. One stayed with my family when I was young." They invited him in, and his name was Michael Hayes. His Star Fallen had been different from Shimmer, more cat-like, with fur that looked like the northern lights. But the story was remarkably similar, a creature found at a time of great need, 7 years of magic and healing, a goodbye that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. "I'm trying to document all the stories," Michael explained, showing them his notebook full of carefully collected accounts. Not to expose or exploit, just to preserve. To let people know that magic is real, that help sometimes comes from unexpected places, that the universe cares about our broken hearts. He spent the afternoon with them, watching Shimmer play with Logan, taking notes in his careful handwriting. Before he left, he said something that stayed with Ethan. "The hardest part isn't the goodbye," he said. "The hardest part is the year after, when you have to learn to see the magic on your own, without them to show you. But here's the secret my Star Fallen taught me. Once you learn to see it, really see it, it never goes away. The world stays magical. You just have to remember to look." Summer came with its long days and warm nights, and they spent most of it outside. Shimmer taught them to navigate by stars that weren't on any chart, to find their way through the woods by following paths that only existed at certain times of day. He showed them how to call fireflies with a particular whistle, how to understand the stories that clouds told as they drifted across the sky. Logan's 5th birthday came, and instead of a party with other children, he requested a camping trip, just the 3 of them. They went to a campground by a lake, and that night, under a canopy of stars, Shimmer did something extraordinary. He stood at the edge of the lake and made that strange musical sound he'd made the night his mother appeared. The water began to glow, softly at first, then brighter, until the entire lake was shining with phosphorescent light. But it wasn't just light. As they watched, shapes began to form in the glowing water. Whales made of light swam through the lake, though it was far too small and shallow for real whales. Schools of luminous fish created patterns that looked like constellations. A great turtle made of stars surfaced, looked at them with ancient eyes, then dove back into the impossible depths. Logan stood at the water's edge, tears of joy streaming down his face, his hand tight in Ethan's. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered. And it was. It was magic made visible, wonder given form, a birthday gift from a creature that understood that the best presents weren't things you could hold, but moments you could remember forever. As they watched the light show in the lake, Ethan thought about the people who might be reading or hearing this story, people who had their own losses, their own moments of unexpected grace. He wanted them to know that healing didn't always come in the forms we expected. Sometimes it came as a mysterious creature in an abandoned pet store. Sometimes it came as 7 years of impossible magic. Sometimes it came as the knowledge that the universe was vast and strange, and occasionally impossibly kind. The light in the lake gradually faded, but the memory of it would never fade. It would become one of those touchstone moments that Logan would carry with him forever, proof that the world was more magical than most people ever realized. Year 2 began with Logan starting kindergarten, and Ethan worried about how he would handle being away from Shimmer during the day. But the star-fallen creature seemed to understand the importance of this transition. Each morning, he would walk Logan to the bus stop, and each afternoon he would be waiting when the bus returned. In between, he stayed with Ethan, a quiet companion during work hours, occasionally doing something magical like making the houseplants bloom out of season or causing rainbows to appear in glasses of water. The bond between all three of them had deepened beyond what Ethan had thought possible. Shimmer wasn't just a magical pet, he was family, as essential to their daily life as breathing. Logan's teacher called one day, concerned and curious. "Logan tells the most extraordinary stories," she said, "about a creature made of starlight, about seeing colors that don't have names, about flowers that sing. He tells them with such conviction that the other children believe him completely. I just wanted to make sure everything is okay at home." Ethan assured her that everything was fine, that Logan just had a vivid imagination fueled by the fantasy books they read together. But he could tell the teacher wasn't entirely convinced. How could she be? Logan's stories had the ring of truth because they were true. Every impossible thing he described was something he'd experienced with Shimmer. That Halloween, Shimmer's presence created something special. As trick-or-treaters came to their door, those who were pure of heart, the young children who still believed in magic without question, could see Shimmer for what he really was. Ethan watched from the doorway as a little girl dressed as a fairy gasped in delight, pointing at Shimmer and exclaiming, "A real magic animal." Her parents smiled indulgently, thinking she was just caught up in the Halloween spirit, but Ethan saw the wonder in her eyes and knew she was seeing the truth. Shimmer seemed to glow a little brighter for those children, as if acknowledging their ability to see him clearly. It was a reminder that children were closer to magic than adults. The growing up often meant learning not to see the extraordinary things that were right in front of us. As winter approached again, marking a full year since they'd found Shimmer, Ethan realized how much they'd all changed. Logan was more confident, more joyful, more connected to the world around him. The grief over Sarah's death was still there, would always be there, but it had transformed from a sharp, unbearable pain into a gentle ache that somehow made the joy sweeter. And Ethan himself had changed too. He saw the world differently now, noticed things he'd never noticed before. The way morning light could turn ordinary windows into portals of gold. The way birds sometimes flew in patterns that looked like words in a language he almost understood. The way certain moments felt heavier than others, as if they were being pressed into the fabric of time itself, marked as important. One snowy evening, Jessica Brooks visited again, bringing with her a box of her grandmother's journals. "I thought you might like to read these," she said. "They're accounts of her time with her star-fallen. They might help you understand what's to come." Ethan spent weeks reading those journals, written in careful cursive script that spoke of wonders similar to what they were experiencing. The star-fallen in those pages was called Whisper, and he had shown Jessica's grandmother how to see the threads that connected all living things. Silver lines of light that ran between trees and animals and people, showing how everything was part of the same great tapestry. There were drawings, too, sketches of impossible things made real, and in them, Ethan recognized the same quality of truth that was in Logan's drawings. The journals also spoke of the progression of the 7 years, how each year brought different lessons, different revelations. Year 1 was about wonder, about learning to see. Year 2 was about trust, about believing in the impossible. Year 3 was about connection, about understanding how all things were linked. Year 4 was about time, about learning that moments could stretch and compress, that a second could contain eternity. Year 5 was about communication, about learning to speak without words. Year 6 was about preparation, about getting ready for goodbye. And Year 7 was about gratitude, about celebrating what had been given rather than mourning what would be lost. Reading those words, Ethan felt both comforted and terrified. 5 more years seemed like so much time and no time at all. But he pushed the fear aside, determined to focus on the present, on the magic they had now. Logan, unaware of the specific timeline, continued to live each day with Shimmer, as if it would last forever. And perhaps that was the best way to approach it, to be fully present in each moment, to absorb every bit of wonder, to let the magic sink so deep into their bones that it would never fully leave. The second winter with Shimmer brought new revelations. He began teaching Logan to understand what he called the between spaces, the moments between seconds, the places between places. Logan would sit very still, his eyes unfocused, and later described seeing the world from angles that didn't exist, seeing colors that had no names, hearing music that played in the spaces between sounds. 2 chapters of Part 1 completed. Spring of the second year arrived with a burst of impossible beauty. Every flower that bloomed in their garden had a tiny spark of light at its center, visible only to those who knew how to look. Shimmer would spend hours in the garden with Logan, and Ethan would watch from the window as his son learned to conduct symphonies of growing things, gesturing with his small hands as plants swayed and danced to music only they could hear. The neighbors had stopped commenting on their exceptional garden. It had moved beyond exceptional into the realm of the inexplicable, and people tend to ignore what they can't explain. But children still stopped to stare, pressing their faces against the fence, seeing wonders their parents' eyes could no longer perceive. One day, Michael Hayes returned with a photographer, an elderly woman named Lily Morgan, who claimed she had a special camera, one that could sometimes capture things that shouldn't be able to be photographed. She was gentle and patient, sitting quietly in their living room for hours, waiting for the right moment. And then, suddenly, she raised her ancient camera and clicked. When the photograph developed weeks later, it showed Logan and Shimmer sitting together, and Shimmer was visible not as the dog or cat that most people saw, but as himself, a creature of starlight and shadow, beautiful and impossible. It was the only photograph they would ever have that showed the truth, and Ethan had it framed and hung it in Logan's room, where it glowed softly in the darkness, a captured moment of pure magic. Summer brought adventures. Shimmer led them on what he seemed to call path walks, though the paths they followed weren't on any map and didn't always exist in the traditional sense. They would start walking in the local park and somehow end up in forests that shouldn't be there, by streams that ran uphill, in meadows where the flowers grew in perfect spirals that made Ethan dizzy to look at. Logan accepted all of this as naturally as breathing, but Ethan sometimes had to sit down and remind himself that this was really happening, that they were really walking through spaces that existed in the cracks between the normal world. On one of these walks, they encountered others like Shimmer. It was brief, just a glimpse, but Ethan saw them clearly, a whole family of Starfallen moving through the forest like living light. They paused to look at Shimmer, and there was communication there, though not in any form Ethan could understand. Logan later said they were saying hello and asking if Shimmer was happy. He told them yes, Logan said with certainty. He told them we're his family now. The idea that Shimmer had chosen them as much as they had chosen him was both wonderful and heartbreaking. It meant that their connection was real, that the love they felt was reciprocated, but it also made the eventual parting feel more profound. How do you say goodbye to someone who chose to be your family? How do you let go of someone who helped you heal from the greatest loss of your life? Ethan pushed these thoughts aside. They still had years. Years of magic, years of growth, years of impossible, wonderful moments. He thought about the people who might be experiencing their own versions of this story, their own unexpected healings, their own brushes with magic. He hoped they understood that the temporary nature of these gifts didn't diminish them. If anything, it made them more precious. Year 3 began with Logan starting first grade, and with it came new challenges. He was old enough now to understand that not everyone could see what he saw, that not everyone believed in the magic he knew to be real. He came home one day in tears because a classmate had called him a liar when he'd talked about Shimmer's true nature. Ethan held him close, feeling his small body shake with sobs, while Shimmer pressed against them both, his warmth more comforting than any words could be. "It's okay if they don't believe," Ethan told his son. "Some people need to see magic to believe in it, and some people can believe first and then see. You're lucky enough to be one of the ones who can see." Logan looked up at him with wet eyes. "But why can't everyone see? Why can't everyone have a Shimmer?" It was a question Ethan couldn't answer, one of those fundamental unfairnesses of life that no parent could adequately explain. That night, Shimmer did something new. He touched his nose to Logan's forehead, and suddenly Logan's tears stopped. His eyes went wide, and he was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, a deep, understanding smile that seemed too old for his 6-year-old face. "Oh," he said softly, "I see now. Everyone does have magic. They just forget how to see it. Shimmer's helping us remember, but the magic was always there. In Mommy's laugh, in the way dandelions grow through cracks in the sidewalk, in how sometimes you know who's calling before the phone rings. It's all magic. Shimmer just makes it easier to see." It was a profound realization, one that would shape how Logan saw the world for the rest of his life. Magic wasn't something separate from regular life. It was woven through everything, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those who remembered how to look. As year 3 progressed, following the pattern described in Jessica's grandmother's journals, the theme of connection became clear. Shimmer began showing them the threads that connected all living things, just as Whisper had shown Jessica's grandmother decades before. They were silver lines of light, gossamer thin, running between everything and everyone. Ethan could see them only in certain lights, at certain angles, but Logan seemed to see them all the time now. He would trace them with his finger, following the connection from the oak tree in their yard to the squirrel that lived in it, from the squirrel to the bird that shared its tree, from the bird to the sky itself. "Everything's connected to everything else," Logan said one day, his voice full of wonder. "When Mommy died, she didn't go away. She just became part of all the connections instead of being in just one place." It was a beautiful thought, and it brought Ethan a comfort he hadn't expected. The idea that Sarah was somehow still part of the great web of connections, that her love and laughter and light had been absorbed into the fabric of everything, made her loss feel less like an ending and more like a transformation. He shared this thought with others who had lost loved ones, hoping it might bring them the same comfort. The responses he received were overwhelming. People shared their own stories of unexpected connections, of signs and synchronicities that suggested their loved ones were still somehow present, just in a different form. It created a community of sorts, people bound together by loss and hope, and the belief that love transcended death. Summer of year 3 brought a new development. Logan began to glow. It was subtle at first, just a faint luminescence that was visible only in complete darkness. But as the weeks passed, it became more pronounced. Not enough for strangers to notice, but enough that Ethan could see it clearly. It was as if some of Shimmer's light had transferred to Logan. Or perhaps it had always been there, and Shimmer had just awakened it. When Ethan asked Jessica Brooks about it, she smiled knowingly. "It happened to my grandmother, too," she said. "The Starfallen don't just show us magic. They wake up the magic that's already inside us. Logan will keep that light for the rest of his life. It will fade enough that others won't see it, but he'll always have it." A reminder that he once walked between worlds. The thought that Logan would carry this mark of magic forever was both reassuring and sad. Reassuring because it meant Shimmer's influence would never truly leave. Sad because it was a reminder that Shimmer himself would leave, that the physical presence they had come to rely on would one day be gone. But Ethan tried to follow Logan's example, to focus on the wonder of the present rather than the loss in the future. Each day brought new revelations, new moments of beauty, new understanding of how the world really worked beneath its mundane surface. Year 4 arrived with its focus on time, and Shimmer began teaching them how fluid time really was. He showed them how to stretch moments, how to make a single sunset last for what felt like hours, how to compress boring waiting into seconds. Logan became adept at this temporal manipulation, though he could only do it when Shimmer was near. He would slow down Saturday morning so they could have longer together as a family. He would speed through homework time, but slow down story time. It was a gentle kind of magic. Nothing that violated the laws of physics, just a shift in perception that made time feel more elastic. Ethan found himself able to do it too, to a lesser extent. He could make his lunch breaks feel like mini vacations, could stretch the moments when Logan laughed until they filled his heart to bursting. It was during this year that they met Savannah Reed, a pediatric nurse who had her own Starfallen story. Her companion had been with her during her childhood, helping her through her mother's illness and death. "He taught me that healing isn't always about fixing," she said, watching Shimmer play with Logan in the yard. "Sometimes it's about being present with someone in their pain, about showing them they're not alone, about reminding them that even in darkness, there are stars." She became a regular visitor, and Logan loved hearing her stories about her Starfallen, who had looked like a cross between a deer and a constellation. She showed them drawings she'd made as a child, remarkably similar to Logan's, all trying to capture something that couldn't quite be captured on paper. She also brought a warning, gentle but clear. "The hardest part is coming," she said to Ethan one evening while Logan was out of earshot. "Years 5 and 6 are when you start to feel the approaching end. Shimmer will begin to prepare you, but it's still difficult. Start preparing yourself now, not for loss, but for transformation. Because that's what it really is. The Starfallen don't leave us, they just change how they're present in our lives." Year 5 began with communication beyond words, just as the journals had predicted. Shimmer and Logan no longer needed to be in the same room to communicate. Logan would suddenly laugh at something Shimmer had said from the garden while he was inside doing homework. Ethan would find himself knowing things Shimmer wanted him to know without any obvious communication having taken place. It was telepathy of a sort, but more than that. It was a sharing of consciousness, a blending of awareness that made the boundaries between them seem less solid. Sometimes Ethan would see through Shimmer's eyes, would experience the world from the perspective of a creature made of starlight. Colors were different, more numerous and vivid. Sounds had texture and taste. Emotions were visible as colored auras around every living thing. It was during one of these shared experiences that Ethan finally understood what Shimmer really was. Not just a creature from another world, but a bridge between worlds. The Starfallen were conduits, allowing humans to glimpse the greater reality that existed beyond their normal perception. They came to those who needed to remember that there was more to existence than what could be seen and measured and proven. They came to reawaken wonder, to restore faith in the impossible, to remind humanity that they were part of something infinitely vast and beautiful. This understanding came with a responsibility. Ethan realized he was meant to share this knowledge somehow, to help others recognize the magic in their own lives, not by proving Shimmer's existence, but by encouraging people to look for their own bridges, their own moments of connection with the infinite. Logan, now 8 years old, had developed a wisdom beyond his years. He helped younger children at school who were dealing with loss, not by talking about Shimmer directly, but by teaching them to look for magic in small things. He showed them how to find shapes in clouds that told stories, how to listen to the songs in rain, how to feel the love of lost ones in unexpected moments of beauty. His teachers were amazed by his empathy and insight, not knowing it came from years of living with a being that existed between worlds. Year 5 also brought unexpected visitors. Other people who had been touched by Starfallen throughout history seemed drawn to them. They would show up at the door with stories to share, photographs that captured hints of magic, journals full of impossible experiences. Ethan began collecting these stories, not with the intention of publishing them, but as a record, a testament to the fact that magic had always been part of human experience, hidden in plain sight, dismissed as folklore or imagination, but absolutely real to those who had lived it. The collection grew to include stories from around the world, different cultures all describing similar experiences with beings that came from beyond, stayed for 7 years, and left their humans forever changed. The universality of it was stunning. It suggested that the Starfallen had been visiting Earth for millennia, perhaps longer, always coming to those who needed them most, always leaving behind a legacy of expanded consciousness and renewed wonder. As Year 6 began, the theme of preparation became evident. Shimmer began spending more time looking at the sky, particularly at night. His glow would pulse in rhythm with certain stars, as if he were communicating with distant others of his kind. He began teaching Logan practical things too, how to find comfort in solitude, how to carry light within himself when external light wasn't available, how to remember joy even in sadness. They were lessons for after, Ethan realized, for when Shimmer was gone. The thought made his chest tight, but he understood the necessity. Shimmer was preparing them to live without his physical presence while keeping his teachings alive in their hearts. Logan understood what was happening with a maturity that amazed Ethan. "He's teaching us to be our own magic," he said one day, his 9-year-old voice steady and sure. "Because he won't always be here to show us, so we have to learn to see it ourselves." It was heartbreaking and beautiful, watching his son prepare for a goodbye that was still a year away. But there was no sadness in Logan's preparations, only a deep appreciation for the time they had left and a determination to learn everything Shimmer had to teach. They began creating more permanent records of their time together. Not just photographs and drawings, but written accounts of each magical moment, each lesson learned, each wonder revealed. It became a family project, with even Shimmer contributing in his way, leaving paw prints of light on certain pages that would glow faintly in the dark. The collection became a treasure trove of magic, a guidebook for finding wonder in the world. They made copies for Jessica Brooks' archive, for Michael Hayes's research, for Savannah Reed's collection. They wanted to ensure that the knowledge wouldn't be lost, that future generations would know that magic was real and accessible to anyone who remembered how to look. As year 6 progressed, Shimmer began to fade slightly. Not dramatically, but enough that Ethan noticed. His glow was softer, his physical presence less solid. Sometimes Ethan could see through him slightly, as if he were already partially existing in another realm. Logan noticed too, but didn't seem alarmed. "He's getting ready to go home," he said simply, "but he's making sure we'll be okay first." And they would be okay, Ethan realized. Different, certainly. Forever changed by their experience, but okay. The healing that had begun with Shimmer's arrival was complete. The raw wound of Sarah's death had become a scar, still visible, but no longer painful. They had learned to carry her memory with joy rather than sorrow, to see her influence in the beauty around them rather than feeling her absence as a void. Shimmer had taught them that love transcended physical presence, that connections persisted beyond separation, that magic was not something external to be found, but something internal to be remembered. These were gifts that would last long after his physical form was gone. The final year began with a sense of anticipation rather than dread. Year 7, the year of gratitude, as the journals had described it. Shimmer seemed more present than ever, despite his increasingly translucent appearance. He spent every possible moment with them, teaching final lessons, sharing final wonders, creating final memories. Logan, now 10, had developed abilities that would have seemed impossible 7 years ago. He could see the connections between all things as clearly as others saw physical objects. He could stretch and compress time with increasing skill. He could communicate without words, not just with Shimmer, but with other living things. He had become, in essence, a bridge himself, someone who could help others see the magic that was always there. They celebrated every small moment that year. The first day of spring, when Shimmer showed them how to paint with light itself, creating temporary murals in the air that lasted only seconds, but were beautiful beyond description. The summer solstice, when Shimmer taught them to dance with shadows, to move in ways that created stories on walls and sidewalks. The first day of autumn, when Shimmer revealed that falling leaves were actually messages from trees, each one carrying a tiny story about the year that had passed. And as winter approached, marking nearly 7 years since that first encounter in the pet store window, they began to prepare for the final goodbye. But it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a graduation, a completion, a perfect circle coming to its close. They had been broken when they found Shimmer, and he had helped them become whole again. Not the same whole they had been before Sarah's death, but a new kind of whole. One that incorporated loss and wonder, sadness and magic, endings and beginnings. Logan created a final drawing, his artistic skills having improved dramatically over the years. It showed their family, all 4 of them, Ethan, Logan, Shimmer, and Sarah, connected by silver threads of light that extended beyond the edges of the paper, suggesting connections that went on forever. It was, Ethan thought, the truest representation of their reality he had ever seen. As the 7th anniversary approached, the stone began to glow more frequently, more intensely. Shimmer spent hours sitting beside it, and sometimes Ethan could swear he heard music, the same ethereal melody that had summoned Shimmer's mother years ago. Logan was calm, almost serene, with an acceptance that Ethan envied. "He's not really leaving, Logan said one evening as they sat together, Shimmer between them, all three watching the stars. He's just changing how he's with us, like Mommy did. She's not gone, she's just with us differently now. Shimmer will be the same. We won't see him, but we'll feel him. In every magical moment. In every bit of wonder we notice. In every connection we recognize. He'll be there. The night of the 7th anniversary arrived with a clarity that felt deliberate, as if the universe had polished the sky specifically for this moment. They walked together to the library where Shimmer's mother had appeared 7 years before. The stone in Ethan's pocket was warm, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Shimmer walked between them, his glow bright despite his translucent form, leaving trails of light in the snow that sparkled like scattered diamonds. When they reached the library steps, Shimmer sat and made that haunting, beautiful sound, the note that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond the physical. The stone blazed with light, and she was there, Shimmer's mother, looking exactly as she had 7 years ago, tall and impossible and beautiful. "You have done well," she said, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "He has learned much about love, about loss, about the beauty of temporary things, about the magic that exists in every moment." She knelt down and Shimmer went to her, but slowly, turning back to look at Logan and Ethan frequently, as if memorizing their faces. "He will carry you with him always," she continued. "Just as you will carry him. The connections formed here are eternal, existing beyond space and time." Logan stepped forward, his young face serious but not sad. "Thank you," he said to Shimmer. "Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for healing us. Thank you for showing us the magic." Shimmer left his mother's side and returned to Logan one last time, pressing his forehead against the boy's chest, right over his heart. The glow that had been part of Logan for years suddenly intensified, and Ethan understood. Shimmer was leaving a part of himself behind, a spark of star-fallen magic that would live in Logan forever. Then Shimmer came to Ethan, and when they touched, Ethan felt everything Shimmer felt, the love deep and pure, the gratitude for being given a family, the joy of having been part of their healing, the sadness of physical parting, the certainty that this was not an ending but a transformation. "Until the stars fall again," Shimmer's mother said, and Ethan heard it in his mind more than his ears. "Until the circle's complete, until all the connections are revealed." And then they were gone, both of them, fading like mist in moonlight, leaving only the stone, now dark and ordinary-looking, and the trails of light in the snow that were already beginning to fade. Logan picked up the stone, holding it carefully. "We should keep this," he said, "for the next family who needs it." They walked home in silence, but it wasn't empty silence. It was full silence, pregnant with memory and meaning. The house felt different without Shimmer's physical presence, but not empty. Everywhere they looked, they saw reminders of the magic he had brought into their lives. The houseplants that still bloomed out of season, the photographs that captured impossible moments, the drawings that documented wonders. The very air seemed to shimmer with residual magic. That night, as Ethan tucked Logan into bed, his son said, "I can still feel him, Daddy." He's different now, but he's still here, in the space between heartbeats, in the pause between breaths, in the moment between sleep and waking. He's part of everything now. And he was right. In the days that followed, they found Shimmer everywhere, in the way morning light played through windows, in the patterns frost made on glass, in the songs of birds that seemed to carry messages, in the connections they felt with other living things, The magic didn't leave with Shimmer. It had been awakened, activated, made permanent. They had been taught to see, and now they couldn't unsee. The world remained full of wonder, full of impossible things, full of bridges between the mundane and the magical. A week after Shimmer's departure, they received a letter, though no one had seen who delivered it. Inside was a photograph, impossible as all the best things were. It showed Shimmer in his new home, surrounded by others of his kind, all made of starlight and possibility. But in the background, barely visible but definitely there, were silver threads extending beyond the frame, connections that reached across space and time, binding them all together forever. Logan added the photograph to their collection, the archive of their 7 years of magic. But he knew, and Ethan knew, that the real archive wasn't in the photographs or drawings or written accounts. It was in their hearts, in their changed perception, in their ability to see magic in the everyday world. They had been given a gift beyond measure, not just Shimmer's presence, but the awakening he had facilitated. They would spend the rest of their lives seeing the world through eyes that had been taught to recognize wonder, hearts that had been opened to impossible possibilities, souls that had been touched by a creature from between the stars. Years passed. Logan grew up but never lost his ability to see the connections between all things, the magic in ordinary moments. He became a teacher, sharing his gift with children who needed to remember that the world was bigger and stranger and more beautiful than they had been told. He would tell them stories, carefully crafted tales that were true but sounded like fiction, about a boy who found a bear cub that wasn't really a bear cub, about 7 years of impossible wonder, about learning that love transcends loss and magic is everywhere for those who remember how to look. Some children believed him completely. Others thought they were just stories, but all of them left his classroom with their eyes a little wider, their hearts a little more open to possibility. Ethan grew older too, but the light that Shimmer had awakened in him never dimmed. He could still see the threads that connected all things, still stretch moments when they were particularly beautiful, still feel Shimmer's presence in the space between heartbeats. He wrote about their experience, adding his account to the growing collection of star-fallen stories that Jessica Brooks and Michael Hayes maintained. He spoke at grief support groups, sharing how a magical creature had helped them heal from loss, teaching that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. Some people thought he was speaking metaphorically. Others recognized the truth in his words and shared their own impossible stories. The stone sat on their mantle, dark and quiet, waiting. Ethan knew that someday someone would need it. Some family broken by loss would be led to it, would activate it with their touch, would begin their own 7-year journey with a star fallen. The cycle would continue, as it always had, as it always would. Magic finding those who needed it most, wonder awakening in hearts that had forgotten how to hope, connections being revealed that had always existed but needed special eyes to see. And always, in the background of their lives, like a melody played too softly to consciously hear but felt in the bones, was Shimmer's presence. Not gone, just transformed. Not lost, just existing differently. On quiet nights, when the stars were particularly bright, Logan and Ethan would stand in the backyard and look up at the sky. They would find the bright star that Logan had identified as Shimmer's home all those years ago, and they would send their love across the vast distances. And sometimes, just sometimes, the star would pulse a little brighter, as if sending love back, as if saying, "I'm here, I'm always here, in every moment of wonder, in every recognized connection, in every heart that remembers how to see magic. The story that had begun with a lonely boy and his grieving father finding an impossible creature in an abandoned pet store window had become something larger. It had become part of the great tapestry of human experience with the miraculous, proof that the universe occasionally sends exactly what we need, even if it's nothing like what we expected. People who heard their story, whether they believed it literally or took it as metaphor, were changed by it. They started looking more carefully at the world around them. They noticed things they had previously overlooked. They found their own small magics, their own moments of connection with something greater. Some found their own star-fallen, creatures of light and wonder that came to help them through difficult times. Others found magic in more subtle forms, in synchronicities and signs, in moments of unexpected beauty, in connections that defied explanation. But all of them were touched by the central truth of Logan and Ethan's story. That magic is real, that healing is possible, that love transcends physical presence, and that sometimes, if we're very lucky and very open, the universe sends us exactly what we need to remember who we really are. The 7 years with Shimmer had ended, but their impact rippled outward like waves on a cosmic pond, touching lives, awakening wonder, revealing connections. And in every child who looked at the world with eyes of wonder, in every grieving heart that found unexpected comfort, in every person who chose to believe in impossible things, Shimmer's legacy lived on. The Star-Fallen had completed their mission. Not just healing one family, but reminding humanity that they were part of something infinitely vast and beautiful. Something that included magic and wonder and connections that spanned the stars. The circle that had begun with a boy finding a bear cub in a pet store window would continue, would always continue, as long as there were hearts that needed healing and eyes willing to see magic. And so the story continues. Not just for Logan and Ethan, but for everyone who has ever looked at the world and suspected there was more to it than what appeared on the surface. For everyone who has ever felt a connection they couldn't explain, experienced a moment of magic they couldn't prove, or found healing in the most unexpected places. The Star-Fallen are still out there, waiting for those who need them, ready to spend 7 years teaching humans to see the magic that was always there. And for those who have eyes to see, who remember how to look with their hearts as well as their eyes, the world remains full of shimmers, full of bridges between the ordinary and the extraordinary, full of proof that we are never truly alone, never truly without magic, never truly disconnected from the vast, beautiful, impossible truth of existence. In the end, that's what Shimmer taught them, what all the Star-Fallen teach those lucky enough to encounter them. That we are made of the same stuff as stars, that the connections between us are real and eternal, that magic isn't something separate from ordinary life, but woven through it like silver threads. That love transcends loss. Wonder transcends logic. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe sends us exactly what we need to remember that we are part of something infinitely precious and strange and beautiful. And that 7 years of magic, fully experienced and deeply appreciated, can last a lifetime and beyond, rippling outward through space and time, touching lives, awakening wonder, revealing the hidden magic that was always there, waiting for someone to remember how to see.